I had fought the worst of all wars and witnessed the redemption of evil. I have seen balance restored to the Force. But order can turn to chaos, as it did when I was born. Now, with my loved ones and my loyal allies, I face a new challenge unlike any before. And I'm not sure at this time we can win.
Star Wars Vector Prime by R.A. Salvatore, the first novel of the new Jedi Order.
We begin the Star Wars EU, at least as I know it, having skipped over the entire Thrawn saga, which I probably shouldn't have done, and I will go back to at one point. We're starting off with Vector Prime, which is the first book in the new Jedi Order series, released in 1999, same year as The Phantom Menace, and also involving a character named Anakin, funnily enough, who is the grandson of the Anakin that people would have known then. It starts off in 25 ABY, that's after the Battle of Yavin, or, doing some quick math, that's about 4 years after the end of the entire original trilogy, the end of Battle of Endor. As far as how things have changed for our main characters, which I had to quickly catch up on all of this, Han and Leia have had 3 kids, all Force-sensitive, Jason Solo, Jaina Solo, those 2 are twins, and then Anakin Solo, who is the younger one, I believe. And then we have Mara Jade, who is now married to Luke Skywalker. This is the first time that I'm ever reading anything with this character involved. And she also has had quite the development in addition to being married to Luke and everything. She is suffering from a deadly disease, which she must continually combat using her Force powers. Everybody's Force sensitive, but it sort of makes sense here, from what I know of her origin anyway. Main conflicts at the start for our characters include Luke debating whether to start a new Jedi Council, as he has some Jedi that are somewhat straying from the path, going a little bit rogue. He wants to make sure that no more dip to the dark side, obviously, and there's now about 100 Jedi Knights running around, so it's getting a little bit unwieldy for him to manage as he mentors Jason. He takes him to a council of the New Republic, which is at a period of relative peace at the start here. Dealing with a couple little civil scuffles, which they send actually one Leia Organa / Leia Solo onto. We are first introduced to the main antagonists of the novel, the Yuuzhan Vong, an extragalactic alien race who fights with a lot of sort of bioorganic weaponry. We're introduced to them through 2 main actors, Nom Anor and Yeoman Carr. Nom Anor is one part of the advanced force has been sent to gain intelligence on the New Republic and the inhabitants of our galaxy, the galaxy of our heroes, that is. So Nom Anor, he is basically posing as a leader. They wear these sort of bio disguises that they use some creature to disguise themselves with, and he's part of the civil strife and destroying all these droids on a planet, sowing a civil war that he wants to start. And Leia, Mara, and her loyal droid, C-3PO, and a couple others in their little entourage are sent to kind of deal with that. They can't really accomplish that mission. And then Yeoman Carr is part of an outside observatory force, and he is used to introduce one of the other main characters, as it ends up being, which is Danny. Danny Quee, I believe her name is. Blonde-haired hottie, showing her right here. But she is part of this scientist team that's supposed to keep an eye on the outer rim of the galaxy, and they detect an object coming in that turns out to be the advanced force for the Yuuzhan Vong as they come in from deep space. Now, the Vong were a super interesting new threat to me because instead of just having like another empire or just another faction that fights just like the Empire, they reminded me more of something that I remember very vividly as a kid because we had the VHS of this movie. They reminded me of Cobra La from the G.I. Joe film from the late 80s. I think it was late 80s. Where they fight with sort of creatures that they've all trained to fight for them. And it's sort of this weird biomechanical kind of way of fighting. Like at different points, they will use these thud bugs, which are like these little floating balls that'll slam into people, or they have this goo that'll reach up and hentai style try to grab everybody with little tentacles and stuff, and you can cut it in half and everything, and it still lives. They even have very Serpentor-like melee weapons where they can tell this creature to sort of turn into a whip, and it has this venomous bite that it can do, or they can make it stiffen up to where it can fight with lightsabers, as they fight with Mara Jade at one point with one of them. So some very interesting weaponry from them. And they also, their main method of attack, as far as starfighters go, are these coral skippers, which are these little creatures that basically they fire like these molten rocks, and they look like rocks themselves, basically. And they travel in these giant world ships that they terraform. And their main sort of commanders are these Yamask creatures. I assume that there's more of them because they destroy one at the end of this novel. So the Yamask is like this big Cthulhu-like creature, this super disgusting thing that it can sort of use the Force, or their version of the Force, because the other interesting thing about them is because they're not from our galaxy, they are not really affected. Mara can't get a good read on them, read their minds, anything like that. But they do have a sort of telepathic control over their forces through this thing. It's called the War Coordinator because it's sent into the middle of their forces, and it coordinates all their ships whenever they get close at a battle later on. Another good scene is when two of the Solo kids, Jason and Anakin, they have a very philosophical debate about the Jedi's role in the galaxy. And it basically boils down to Anakin is a little bit more of a hands-on kind of guy. He says we have the power to do good, why not do good? Whereas Jason seems to be a little bit more of the, well, we could overstep. We're really meant to just be sort of custodians of the, if the dark side crops up, maybe we deal with it then. We shouldn't be quick to conflict because basically Anakin's constantly practicing his lightsaber forms, and Jason thinks that's a little bit too combat-centric. It shouldn't be the focus of Jedi training. So some interesting philosophical debates there. Jaina is a little bit more pilot-centric. She still very much has the Force, but rather than those two, she's very much the ace pilot of it, which she demonstrates in a little flying exercise at Lando's place whenever they go to investigate the sort of Outer Rim incursion. She ends up having the best time over the two boys, but she has strengths and weaknesses, and they all do, and that's why they're very much more in-depth characters than what we see in some other Elseworlds versions of Star Wars. We also learn that the Vong are responsible for a deadly disease that Mara Jade has contracted. It's basically like a cancer, only it's attacking different parts of the body, as it seems to be a somewhat living thing that'll consciously try to end its host in different ways. And she constantly combats it with the Force. They haven't been able to find a solution, and other people that have been infected with it have all died. None of them have had her Force powers to resist it even this long. We find out that that's actually Nome Anor, the one guy who was sent in as sort of a sleeper agent for the Vong, that he gave her that because he's trying to observe its effect and how to destroy the Jedi more, because they've identified the Jedi as the primary threat to them in their invasion of this galaxy. And this actually gives birth, no pun intended, to an incredibly emotionally powerful scene where Mara and Leia have to consult with each other, because Mara actually finds out that it was attacking her womb as she slept. This disease was trying to slip in there and destroy her ability to give birth. She hasn't had any kids yet, and she perhaps wants them. Plus, as the book phrases it, it's something along the lines of, it's the very center of her womanhood. And this is a very, obviously not something I can sympathize with, but maybe something I can empathize with. Where it's like, wow, it's like an incredibly personal thing, and it's something that's very specific to that sex. And so, Leia is there to confront her in that moment. They show a little emotional vulnerability, a little bit of depth in the characters, and they sort of talk about their different stages in life, where they're about the same age, but Leia has already had her kids and everything. So it's that was a very memorable scene for me personally. We also get some very faithful recreations of original trilogy stuff, but not without it being a rehash. For instance, Han and Chewie have a lot of their kind of signature comedy whenever they're trying to do this little flying exercise. They're bumping into each other. They're getting by on sheer luck and their intuition with each other. So some really good stuff there. And that plays a lot into what ends up being probably the most dramatic outcome of this entire book, which is the death of Chewbacca. And they kill him in no uncertain terms. They have a moon land on the guy. And he goes out yelling to the sky. And really, I would say it's a heroic ending. It's also an ending that causes a lot of conflict because Anakin Jr., that is, obviously not the one that's been dead for a long time, but Anakin, he basically has a chance to try and fly back and save him. This moon is crashing because of a Vong creature that's been pulling it down to this planet that Lando roped them into going to do some smuggling onto. They get there, they see that this moon is coming down, and they're trying to save as many people as they can. Anakin maybe goes back one too many times to try and save them. Chewbacca has to throw him onto the ramp of the Falcon. And a last-ditch effort, he can't quite get up there. There's some shaking. There's buildings hitting it and all this sort of stuff. And the moon's coming down. And so Chewbacca faces it down. He raises his hands to the sky, and he just roars at it as he's dying. Han watches him. He says he burns the image into his skull, basically. Anakin still has guilt, even though he thinks logically he made the right decision. He turns the Falcon around and speeds out of there because they would have all died. Han, understandably, still blames him. Still says, hey, he went back for you. You didn't go back for him. And he was you chose to leave him. And it's in a fit of rage. And probably if he could think on it later, he wouldn't have said these things. But in the heat of the moment, they had to escape, actually, another Vong attack. And, Han and his kid, they basically have to gut it out, though. Like, he calls him up to be his co-pilot a few minutes later, and it's like, pretty clear, I don't forgive you, but we got to get this done right now. And it's men just kind of got to bottle up those emotions sometimes, and you got to make it work even when you're really blaming each other. And it's a really interesting moral dilemma for the two of them. It's like, how much guilt, how much love do you have for your kid and everything? And it's like, obviously I still love my kid, but I'm also angry as hell at him for the situation that unfolded. And I give them credit for it doesn't seem like they're gonna resurrect him or anything. Like, it's done. And that's bold to kill him off in the EU. And so, it's probably the most emotional part of the book, and it's not something that disappears. They very much continue to deal with it as the book progresses. Han later reminisces that it's like his protective bubble around him and his friends is gone. And so he has to deal with this now, that yes, me and my closest friends can die. I know we've made it through a lot of adventures. We've been really lucky. He says it feels like there's a bubble around them. No more. And so it's really a consequential death, which is something that's missing in a lot of modern media, where they make you feel it. It serves a purpose dramatically, with those two especially, really with all the kids. And it obviously affects the reader as well. And so through meeting up with Lando and evacuating the planet where that moon eventually ends up hitting, we end up having the sort of final conflict of the whole thing, which is whenever the war coordinator has made his base on a planet known as Helska IV, our heroes, Leia, Han, Luke, Mara, they're all together on Lando's mining operation, which is Dubrillion, where they have to at first defend. The Solo kids show their mettle, show their connection whenever they do this cool little trio of TIE fighters. They're sweeping through. They're at first told to stay back, and then they end up getting some shit done. They end up really helping out with the battle, although Anakin ends up rocketing off whenever his is damaged. But they do some major damage to the Vong forces, those coral skippers. And they end up repelling the attack enough that the New Republic gets a Star Destroyer out there, the Rejuvenator, which they then use to attack Helska IV, because Luke had scouted it out. You know, he'd done some crafty piloting, managed to escape whenever he was getting pulled down to the planet, and he figured out that, oh, this is probably where their kind of central operation is, whatever these creatures are. And they basically had found a couple survivors of some earlier attacks that were able to tell them enough that it was like, oh, this is a real threat. So they gather together what they can, the forces of Lando, some of the New Republic guys that had come with the Rejuvenator, and they end up going after him. And it ends in just complete disaster, because it turns out when you get close to that war coordinator, he can coordinate all the little starships, and he ends up taking out the Rejuvenator because the captain of it is the word I was looking for. He ends up taking him a little lightly. He wants to get back to like, oh, I got to get back to real business down in the core worlds. He doesn't realize what a threat this is, that this is just an advanced force of a much larger threat even. So he underestimates them. They end up all dying. The New Republic, they manage to retreat after that happens, but they basically got to abandon this. Well, then they get some word from Dany, who managed to escape the main planet there. She comes back with them and says, like, hey, these guys are like a real deal. Luke obviously senses the danger. Anybody who's force sensitive seems to have a sense of how big this could be. So they go, all right, we got some stuff we got to take care of. They say, when are they going to be expecting us to come back? Not right now, not after they just beat us. So let's head back. We got this crazy plan involving some somewhat wonky science, I'll admit, through where they're going to get the planet down to absolute zero, I think they were making ice accumulate on it, and then whenever it heated back up, it basically expanded and exploded, is my very layman understanding of the science of this, which is probably largely made up anyway. But basically they explode the entire planet that the war coordinator's on, and once it freezes, all the Yuuzhan Vong forces are completely disoriented, running into each other, running into planets, trying to fly back to the planet to help whatever stopped their communication. And then whenever it explodes, it takes out the majority of them. So this is sort of their advanced force. It's gone, but Nome Anor knows that the main fleet is still yet to come. And they've already suffered losses through Chewbacca, through the Rejuvenator. And they know that there's a larger threat afoot. And so we leave on the sort of ominous note of the bubble of protection has been burst, and will our heroes manage to prevail? So overall, I certainly like it more than some other versions of post-original trilogy content that we've gotten. I liked most of the new characters. Some of them were a little bit, overly competent in all areas, but for the most part, they had strengths and weaknesses, they had interesting flaws, they had psychological stuff to explore. So they managed to keep things a little bit more interesting and in-depth than some more modern versions of this post-OT that we've seen. And I hate to keep comparing it, but the differences do stick out because this is infinitely more in-depth. And characters like Mara Jade just add so much to it rather than simply doing member berries and discarding these characters. They add new elements, they add new stages of life to our original characters. And then their kids are not like annoying or anything. They're actually very interesting characters. I liked a lot of the scenes. I liked the debate scene between Jason and Anakin. And I really liked Jaina was a little bit more bland, I suppose, but I really liked Mara. I thought she was fantastic at this stage that she's at. I'm kind of anticipating seeing where she comes from and everything now. I know a little bit of that. But overall, I'd probably say I'd give it like a 4 out of 5. I grade on whole numbers and try to keep it more general categories. That's why I like to do it out of 5. So this is like, pretty above average, pretty interesting. It had a lot of legwork to do, introducing a whole new faction and all these new characters. And for me, it totally worked. And I'm very interested to see where it goes from here on out. As this conflict presumably intensifies. And as our characters have to deal with both the death of Chewbacca, which they dealt with a lot in this one, but also Luke's going to have to learn how to manage the entire Jedi Order in a time of war, is what I'm assuming is going to be the conflict. So that'll be very interesting. And the whole thing with forming the Jedi Council has still not been resolved. So we shall see, and we shall see you next time when I review the next one. Goodbye for now. Keep on reading, I suppose.